I got engaged to my girlfriend after 7 years together, and she happily accepted my proposal. But just 3 hours later, I walked in on her kissing my younger brother. Then, 2 years after that, my mom actually tried to leave their baby in my care. Alright, let's get into it. So, I'm a 29-year-old guy, and I've rewritten this story at least 5 different times because I kept worrying I'd sound completely unhinged. At this point, though, I don't even care anymore. Here's the whole disaster. I'm using a throwaway account because my family has a talent for snooping that honestly puts federal investigators to shame. I started dating my girlfriend, I'll call her Chloe, back when we were both seniors in high school. Prom season was coming up, and I was just a pretty average guy. I wasn't one of the popular kids, but I wasn't invisible either. I played a couple of sports, earned decent grades, and mostly kept to myself. Chloe was the complete opposite. Everybody knew who she was. She wasn't the stereotypical queen bee or head cheerleader, but she had this way of getting along with absolutely everyone. She was smart, beautiful, friendly, and always seemed to have a smile on her face. I'd been crushing on her for about a year, but I never worked up the nerve to ask her out. Then one day, right before prom, one of my friends got tired of hearing me make excuses and said, "Man, just ask her already." So I finally did. I honestly couldn't believe it when she agreed. Prom ended up being one of the best nights I'd had in a long time. We connected way better than I ever expected, and about a week later we officially became a couple. Then, by some incredible stroke of luck, we both got accepted into the same college. We spent all 4 years there together, and after graduation we moved into our own place. Life honestly felt perfect. We were the kind of couple people would look at and quietly envy. Before I go any further, though, I need to explain my family a little. My younger brother, Mason, who's 27 now, was always the golden child. There was never any debate about it. He was more attractive than me, better at sports, more outgoing, and girls seemed to flock to him without him even trying. He was basically the younger brother who somehow managed to outshine the older one at everything. Growing up, it was always, "Look what Mason did," or "Why can't you be more like Mason?" Meanwhile, I mostly faded into the background. When we were kids, things weren't bad between us. We'd build blanket forts, play video games for hours, and do all the normal stuff brothers do. But once he got into high school while I was already away at college, we slowly drifted apart. Whenever he'd visit me on campus, it took him about 5 minutes to become the most popular guy in the room. Everyone wanted to hang out with him. It annoyed the hell out of me, but honestly, I had gotten used to living in his shadow. Mason already knew Chloe from high school since he was only 2 grades behind us. They'd always been friendly, but I never gave it much thought. They'd chat at family get-togethers or whenever he stopped by to visit. Honestly, I figured that was a good thing. My girlfriend getting along with my brother seemed completely normal. Still, if I'm being honest, there were little things that bothered me over the years, even though I never said anything. Sometimes she'd laugh while looking at a text message, and when I'd ask what was so funny, she'd casually say, "Oh, it's just your brother being an idiot." Other times they'd laugh about inside jokes that I didn't understand because I hadn't been there. At parties, some of my friends would even comment, "Wow, Chloe and Mason have amazing chemistry." Or they'd joke, "It's crazy how much those two are alike." I always laughed it off because what else was I supposed to do? At the end of every day, Chloe still came home with me. She constantly told me she loved me, and we spent years talking about the future we'd build together. After 7 years together, I finally decided it was time to ask her to marry me. I spent months putting money aside so I could buy her a nice engagement ring. It wasn't outrageously expensive, but it definitely wasn't cheap either. I planned the proposal at the same Italian restaurant where we'd had our very first real college date. I made reservations well in advance, talked with the staff about the surprise, and planned every little detail. I also arranged for both of our families, along with a handful of close friends, to meet at our apartment afterward so we could celebrate together without Chloe knowing. The proposal itself couldn't have gone any better. Dinner was amazing. When dessert arrived, the ring box was sitting right there on the plate. I got down on one knee. I started giving the speech I'd rehearsed for weeks, completely forgot half of it, and probably sounded like a nervous idiot. None of that mattered. She burst into tears, said yes, and the whole restaurant started clapping. It was one of those moments where life feels absolutely perfect, like nothing could possibly go wrong. After dinner, we headed back to our apartment where everyone was waiting to surprise us. Chloe acted completely shocked, even though I'm pretty sure she'd already figured something was up. Her dad stood up and gave this heartfelt toast that had nearly everyone wiping away tears. Even Mason seemed genuinely happy for us. He gave me a hug, slapped me on the back, and said, "You're one lucky man." He wasn't nearly as loud or energetic as usual, but I assumed he was just exhausted. The celebration lasted for hours. People were laughing, eating, drinking, and already talking about wedding plans. I remember sitting there thinking it was the happiest night of my entire life. I honestly felt like everything I'd worked for had finally come together. The woman I'd loved for 7 years had just agreed to become my wife. We both had stable jobs, a nice apartment, and what I believed were supportive families. At least, that's what I believed at the time. For once, it felt like everything in my life was falling perfectly into place. By the time midnight rolled around, people slowly started heading home. Most of Chloe's friends had already left. My old college roommate and his wife were the last guests to leave besides our immediate family. I was standing in the kitchen rinsing glasses, still riding the excitement of getting engaged. That's when I noticed Mason quietly slipping out the back door with a cigarette. That wasn't unusual for him. Late-night smoke breaks were practically part of his personality. A couple of minutes later, Chloe walked through the room and casually mentioned that she needed to take care of something really quick before coming back. At first, I didn't think twice about it. But then 5 minutes passed. Then another 5. Neither of them came back. That's when something inside me suddenly clicked. Why were they both gone at exactly the same time? I couldn't explain it, but something felt deeply wrong. It was like my chest tightened for no reason. Maybe my brain was finally putting together all the little warning signs I'd ignored for years. I walked down the hallway. The spare bedroom where everyone had tossed their coats had the door cracked open just enough for a thin strip of light to shine through. I figured Chloe might be inside grabbing something, so I pushed the door open. And in that instant, it felt like the entire world stopped moving. Mason had Chloe pressed against the wall. His hands were all over her. She wasn't trying to pull away. She was kissing him like he was the only man she'd ever wanted. Like I had never existed. They were so wrapped up in each other that neither of them even realized I was standing there at first. The worst part was that I just froze. I stood there like a complete fool, still wearing the exact same clothes I'd proposed to her in only a few hours earlier. I'd spent weeks planning every detail of that night. I'd picked out the music. I'd decorated the backyard with string lights. I'd even worn the blazer she'd once told me made me look nice and well put together. Only a few hours before, I'd slipped an engagement ring onto her finger. People were still congratulating us. And somehow, there I was, staring at the two of them. I just stood there, completely frozen. The woman I'd asked to spend the rest of her life with was pressed up against my brother, kissing him like I was nothing more than some random guy she'd never met. My chest felt like it was being squeezed shut. The adrenaline hit before my brain had a chance to process what I was seeing. I couldn't move. It honestly felt like I had stepped into someone else's life by mistake. For a second, I actually wondered if I'd walked into the wrong house. But I hadn't. That was my home. That was my fiancé. That was the night we had just gotten engaged. And that was my own brother. I don't remember making the decision to swing at him. My body reacted before my mind ever caught up. 1 second I was standing in the doorway, unable to move. The next, I'd slammed Mason to the floor and started throwing punch after punch. We crashed into the nightstand. A lamp shattered. The curtains came down as we struggled across the room. Chloe was screaming at us to stop, but I barely heard her. Her voice sounded distant, like it was coming through water. A few seconds later, my dad and Chloe's brother rushed into the room and dragged us apart. My lip had split open. My knuckles were torn up and bleeding. Mason already had a swollen black eye forming, and blood was pouring from his nose. We were both gasping for air. All we could do was glare at each other with absolute hatred. What the hell is going on? I shouted as I looked back and forth between them. Chloe just stood there crying. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. She didn't say a single word to explain herself. Mason wiped the blood from under his nose and actually had the nerve to say, "I'm sorry, man. It just happened." It just happened? I couldn't believe those were the words coming out of his mouth. What, you accidentally tripped and your lips landed on hers? You somehow ended up making out by mistake? It just happened? You're kissing my fiancée on the same night I proposed to her, and that's your explanation? By then, everyone had crowded into the doorway. They all stood there staring in complete shock. My mom had both hands covering her mouth. Chloe's parents looked like they'd seen a ghost. I turned back toward Chloe. I kept waiting for her to say something. Anything. Tell me she'd made a terrible mistake. Beg me to forgive her. Blame the alcohol. Give me any explanation at all. Instead, she just stared at the floor. Tears rolled silently down her face. She never said a word. And in that moment I knew. There was no way this had been the first time. This wasn't some spontaneous mistake. They'd been hiding this behind my back. Probably for a long time. How long? I asked. My voice sounded strangely calm, even though it felt like my heart was being ripped straight out of my chest. Nobody answered. How damn long? I yelled. The entire room jumped. Mason looked over at Chloe before looking back at me. It's complicated. I actually laughed. It sounded completely unhinged. Even to me. Complicated. That's really the excuse you're going with? So that's what you call secretly messing around with your brother's fiancée for who knows how long? Complicated. It wasn't like that, Mason muttered. Finally, Chloe spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. We never wanted to hurt you. Well, congratulations, I shouted. You did a terrible job of avoiding that. Then I pointed toward the front door. Get out. Every single one of you. Get the hell out of my apartment. My parents immediately tried calming everyone down. They kept saying we should all sit together later, once everyone had cooled off emotionally. As if this were just some argument that could be fixed after a night's sleep. There isn't anything left to talk about, I said. You've got 5 minutes to grab whatever you need and leave before I start throwing your stuff out the window. Mason started taking a step toward me. My dad quickly grabbed him and held him back. Honestly, that was probably the smartest thing anyone did that night because I was more than ready to start fighting again. One by one, everyone headed toward the door. Everyone except Chloe. She reached out and tried to touch my arm. I jerked away immediately, like her hand had burned me. I just need to grab some clothes and my phone charger, she started to say. Take whatever you need for tonight, I interrupted. You can come back for everything else when I'm not here. Text me first. I don't ever want to unexpectedly see your face. She started crying even harder. Please, can we just talk? It's not what you think. It is exactly what I think. I proposed to you tonight. And a few hours later, you were making out with my brother in our bedroom. What part am I misunderstanding? We never slept together, she insisted. I swear. It was only feelings. We fought those feelings for a long time. But tonight, after you proposed. After I proposed what? You decided the perfect way to celebrate was kissing my brother? That was your breaking point? Grab your things, Chloe. We're finished. Then something changed. The tears stopped almost instantly. She folded her arms across her chest and looked me straight in the eye. I'm not leaving. We split the rent, remember? I pay just as much to live here. She acted like she hadn't completely destroyed our relationship in less than 10 seconds. Like the fact that the apartment and everything attached to it was legally mine somehow didn't matter just because she'd been sending me half the monthly rent. I honestly couldn't believe she was still arguing with me. Then she said something that hurt even more. You know what? I never even liked you. Not in high school. Not ever. I only dated you because I felt sorry for you. You were just that awkward guy who kept following me around. No one else asked me out, so I gave you a chance. You should be grateful I put up with you for all these years. She said it like being with me had been some kind of charity project. Before I could even respond, she stormed out of the room. She slammed the bedroom door behind her like I was somehow the one who had betrayed her. That was the moment everything truly sank in. I wasn't only losing the woman I planned to marry. I'd spent 7 years building a life with someone who had never respected me in the first place. To her, I wasn't a partner. I was just someone she felt sorry enough to tolerate. While everyone stood around watching the fallout, I quietly walked back down the hallway. I went into the bedroom. The engagement ring box was still sitting on the nightstand. I picked it up. Then I walked back into the living room. Mason and my parents were still standing there, looking completely stunned, like actors who had forgotten their lines in a terrible soap opera. Without saying anything, I opened the ring box. I took the engagement ring out. Then I dropped it straight into the trash. I looked Mason directly in the eyes. "Congratulations," I said. "You won yourself a liar. Someone who bails the second life gets difficult. I guess that kind of thing runs in the family." After that, I opened the front door. I told every last one of them to leave. Once they were finally gone, I collapsed onto the couch in the dark apartment. The engagement ring box was still sitting in my pocket. None of it felt real. It honestly felt like I was trapped inside a nightmare. How does your life go from the happiest it's ever been to the worst it's ever been in just a few hours? The next morning was brutal. It felt like waking up after the world's worst emotional hangover. The apartment was a complete wreck from both the engagement party and the fight. Without really thinking about it, I started cleaning. I moved from room to room almost on autopilot. Around lunchtime, my phone started blowing up. Friends who'd been at the party were checking to see if I was okay. Chloe was texting about when she could come get the rest of her things. My mom sent a message saying everyone was worried about me. I ignored every single one of them. I just kept cleaning. Somehow, I convinced myself that if I could put the apartment back together, maybe my life would eventually start fitting back together too. That night, I sat down by myself and started making a mental checklist of everything I needed to do. I had to find a new place to live. I needed to change my phone number. I had to remove Chloe from every shared account we had. Then there was all the furniture, decorations, and random stuff we'd collected over 7 years that needed to be divided up. I even caught myself wondering if I should quit my job just so I wouldn't risk running into her, especially since our offices were in the same building. It was overwhelming. There were so many loose ends that I barely knew where to begin. But strangely enough, making those plans also gave me a little hope. For the first time since everything fell apart, it felt like I was taking control of my own life again instead of just reacting to the disaster. The next morning, Chloe texted me asking if she could stop by and grab some clothes. I told her I'd pack a few things, leave them in the hallway, and make sure I wasn't home. I stuffed some of her basic clothes into a couple of bags, left them outside the apartment, and spent the next few hours sitting alone in a coffee shop. When I came back, the bags were gone. So was she. All she'd left behind was her apartment key and a handwritten letter. Honestly, I almost threw the letter straight into the trash without opening it. Looking back, I wish I had. The whole thing was exactly what you'd expect. She wrote about never meaning for any of this to happen. She claimed she had truly loved me. She said she hoped that one day I'd find it in my heart to forgive both of them. It was the same tired garbage every cheater seems to say. One paragraph apologized for betraying me. The next tried to justify it by talking about being in love. The part that hurt the most came at the very end. She wrote that, deep down, she'd always had feelings for Mason. She admitted those feelings had been there even before she and I started dating. According to her, there was just something about him that she could never resist. She claimed she'd spent years fighting those feelings because she cared about me too. But eventually, she said, she couldn't fight them anymore. She finished by saying she hoped that someday I'd understand. Reading that felt like getting punched in the stomach all over again. 7 years. 7 years with someone who apparently had feelings for my brother the entire time. Someone who admitted she couldn't resist him. I couldn't stop wondering if I'd just been the backup plan. Was I only the safe choice until she finally got the chance to be with the guy she actually wanted? That same day, I called my landlord and gave notice that I was moving out. There was no chance I was staying in an apartment where every room reminded me of her, of us, or at least the version of us that I thought had been real. For the next 3 days, I disappeared from everyone. I ignored every phone call, every text. Most of the time, I kept my phone turned completely off. On the 4th day, someone started knocking on my door. I thought about pretending I wasn't home, but they just kept knocking. Eventually, I opened it. It was my parents. Mom had that worried expression she always wore whenever she wanted sympathy. Dad looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "We need to talk," Mom said. I stepped aside and let them inside. I didn't offer them a drink. I didn't invite them to sit down. I just stood there with my arms crossed, waiting to hear whatever excuse they'd come up with. Then they dropped the biggest bombshell of all. They admitted they'd known about Mason and Chloe for years. Not suspected, actually known. According to them, Mason and Chloe had been carrying on an on-again, off-again affair ever since my sophomore year of college. My parents found out about it 2 years earlier after my mom walked in on the two of them together at our family's cabin during a summer vacation. As soon as she said that, another memory suddenly came rushing back. After that cabin trip, one of my cousins had made a strange comment. She'd laughed and said something like, "Family loyalty has a funny definition around here." At the time, I had no idea what she meant. Now it finally made perfect sense. All of those old memories started replaying in my head while my dad kept talking. "We didn't tell you because we didn't want to hurt you," he said. Like somehow that made any of this better. "Chloe promised it was over," he continued. "She told us she'd made a mistake and that she really loved you." I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. "A mistake?" I asked. "A mistake that lasted for years? You both knew about it and never told me?" "Mason is our son too," my mom said quietly. "We didn't want to lose either of you." That was the moment something finally clicked. I'd spent my whole life refusing to see it, but now it was impossible to ignore. I had never been their priority. Not once. Mason had always been the favorite. I was just there. Even when he was betraying me in the worst way imaginable, they still chose to protect him instead of me. "So you let me propose to a woman you already knew was cheating on me?" I asked. I was shaking with anger. "You sat through the proposal dinner. You stood at the engagement party. You watched me celebrate while knowing she'd been lying to my face for years." Dad looked down at the floor. "We thought it was over," he said quietly. "We didn't want to destroy your relationship over something we believed had ended." "Well, it clearly wasn't over," I shot back. "If you'd told me 2 years ago, I could have walked away then. Instead, I found out only after I got down on one knee. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Do you understand how much worse you made all of this by keeping it from me?" Mom started crying. She always cried whenever she realized she was losing an argument. I'd watched that happen my entire life. "We were only trying to protect you," she sobbed. Then, without missing a beat, she completely changed her tone. Her voice became almost calm. Way too calm for what she was about to say. "Look," she said. "Chloe has every right to fall in love with someone who understands her. Mason is more relaxed. He balances her personality. You've always been a little too uptight." I just stared at her. Everything suddenly made sense. Every excuse. Every time they'd chosen him over me. Every time I'd been expected to accept it. "You know what?" I finally said. My voice wasn't shaking from anger anymore. It was shaking because I'd finally seen the truth. "Congratulations. You can keep choosing him. You always have. But I'm done. I'm done with every one of you. Get out of my apartment." "You don't mean that," Mom whispered. "We're your family." "Yeah," I said as I walked over and opened the front door. And that's the saddest part. They finally left. That conversation was the last real one I had with either of them for the next 2 years. They tried calling. They texted. They even showed up at my place a few times. None of it mattered. I changed my phone number. I cut off all contact. As far as I was concerned, they no longer existed. Later on, one of our mutual friends told me something that didn't surprise me nearly as much as it should have. Apparently, Chloe had moved in with Mason only 2 weeks after we broke up. 2 weeks. So much for all that nonsense about it being just feelings. So much for claiming they'd never slept together. What a joke. Looking back, I honestly think they'd been planning to end up together for a long time. They were probably just waiting for the moment when everything would finally explode. Oddly enough, losing Chloe wasn't even the hardest part. If anything, I was relieved I found out before marrying someone capable of doing that to me. The part that really destroyed me was realizing my own family had betrayed me. Every memory suddenly felt fake. Every holiday, every family dinner, every birthday. I couldn't stop thinking about all the times they'd smiled at me while hiding the truth. That dinner 6 months earlier, they already knew. Christmas, they knew then too. My birthday, same thing. For a long time, I couldn't trust anybody. I questioned every relationship in my life. Did my friends know? Were people laughing behind my back? Was I the only idiot who didn't realize my girlfriend had been sleeping with my own brother? I spent months carrying around a level of anger that honestly scared me. Eventually, though, I realized I couldn't stay stuck there forever. Little by little, I started putting my life back together. I threw myself into work. I started going to the gym almost every day. I made new friends who had never met Chloe or Mason and knew nothing about my past. Slowly, I started feeling like myself again. Or maybe not the old version of me. Maybe someone new. Someone tougher. Someone more careful. Definitely someone who trusted people a lot less. But I was stronger because of it. I eventually found a new apartment on the other side of town. I built a routine that kept me moving forward. I worked. I went to the gym. I started cooking real meals instead of living on takeout. I spent time with friends who couldn't have cared less about the mess my family had created. During all of that time, I never reached out to my parents. At first, they kept trying to contact me. Phone calls went unanswered. Every text stayed unread. Eventually, they stopped trying. If loyalty is supposed to go both ways, my family drove that relationship straight into a wall years ago. One night, I went downtown with a few coworkers to grab some drinks. I hadn't been to that bar in forever because it used to be one of Chloe's and my favorite places. I figured enough time had passed that it wouldn't bother me anymore. I was wrong. The second I walked in, I spotted Mason and Chloe sitting together in a booth with a group of friends. They looked like the perfect happy couple. Luckily, they hadn't noticed me yet. I just stood there, completely unsure whether I should turn around and leave or pretend I hadn't seen them. One of my coworkers noticed something was wrong and followed where I was looking. He knew the basic version of what had happened between me, Chloe, and Mason, even if he didn't know every ugly detail. Without missing a beat, he said, "Let's get out of here. This place isn't worth it." We started heading for the door. Before we made it out, though, Mason looked up. Our eyes met. For about 3 seconds, neither of us looked away. Then he nudged Chloe. She turned around. The expression on her face was strange. For just a split second, she actually looked happy to see me. Then reality seemed to hit her, and that look disappeared. I didn't say a word. I didn't cause a scene. I simply turned around and walked out. My friends came with me. They looked confused, but nobody pressured me to explain anything. The next morning, I woke up to a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was from Mason. "Good seeing you last night. We should talk sometime." I stared at that message for way too long. Then I deleted it and blocked the number. Talk? About what? About how he'd spent years sleeping with my girlfriend behind my back. About how my own parents helped keep it a secret. About how they all waited until after I proposed before my entire life exploded. Yeah. I wasn't interested. Another year went by. Then another. Life slowly got better. I earned a promotion at work. I even started going on a few casual dates. Nothing serious. I still wasn't ready for another relationship. But I was living again. I was moving forward. Then, after 2 years of complete silence, my mom suddenly started calling me from random phone numbers. Every time I blocked one number, she'd call from another. After about the 5th different number, I finally answered. I was fully prepared to tell her to leave me alone once and for all. "Please don't hang up," she said before I could even speak. "It's about the baby." "The baby?" I asked. "What baby?" "Your baby," she answered. "With Chloe." I actually laughed out loud. "I don't have a baby with Chloe. We haven't spoken in 2 years." "She says it's yours," my mom insisted. "She got pregnant right before you two broke up." She didn't know until afterward. That was the moment I realized they were still living in their own fantasy world. Chloe and I hadn't even been intimate for nearly a month before I proposed. Every time I tried, she'd had another excuse. She had a headache. She said she was on her period. She was exhausted. She was stressed from work. Now I knew exactly why. She'd probably been spending that time with Mason. "That's literally impossible," I told my mom. "Where's Chloe? Put her on the phone." There was a long pause. Finally, my mom answered. "She's not here anymore. She left." Then the whole story spilled out. 3 months earlier, Chloe had given birth to a baby boy. Mason had been thrilled about becoming a father. The two of them had been playing the part of the perfect little family. Apparently, they'd been posting pictures all over social media. I wouldn't know. I'd blocked every single one of them years earlier. Everyone had been congratulating them. They'd received gifts. My parents were overjoyed about having their first grandchild. Then everything fell apart. About 6 weeks after giving birth, Chloe packed her bags and disappeared. She left behind a note saying motherhood wasn't the life she wanted. She wrote that she'd lost herself and needed to figure out who she really was. According to my mom, she'd moved to California with some guy she'd met online. She abandoned both Mason and the baby without looking back. "Mason's really struggling," my mom said. "He can't take care of a newborn and work full-time. We've been helping as much as we can, but we're getting older. The baby needs his father." I needed a second to process what she'd just said. "Hold on," I replied. "You seriously think I'm the father? You just told me Chloe walked away from her own child because being a mom was too difficult. And you honestly expect me to believe this?" Then my dad suddenly joined the conversation. Apparently they'd had me on speaker the whole time. "We bought one of those home DNA tests," he said. "It suggested Mason probably wasn't the father. You're the only other person Chloe was with around that time. So we think the baby might be yours. Or maybe one of the other guys she was sleeping with." I shot back. "I'm not cleaning up the disaster Mason and Chloe created. That's your problem. We're still your family," my mom pleaded. "This little boy is your nephew. Even if he isn't your son. Don't punish an innocent child because of what Mason and Chloe did." That was when I finally understood where this conversation was going. "You actually expect me to raise my brother's baby because the woman who cheated on me abandoned him? After everything all of you did to me? Are you seriously saying this right now?" "Watch your language," my mom replied automatically. "You need to step up. Family takes care of family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You weren't thinking about family when you let me propose to someone you already knew was cheating on me. You weren't thinking about family when you protected Mason instead of telling me the truth. You weren't thinking about family when you spent years lying straight to my face." Then my dad spoke again. His voice had that same strict tone he'd always used when I was a kid. "We're bringing the baby to your apartment tomorrow. You'll change your mind once you see him." I ended the call without another word. Then I threw my phone across the room so hard that it slammed into the wall and cracked. The nerve of those people was unbelievable. First, they spent years covering up Mason's affair with Chloe. Then they sat there smiling while I proposed to her, knowing exactly what had been happening behind my back. Now they expected me to raise the child she'd abandoned because poor Mason couldn't handle being a single father. What kind of world were they living in where that sounded reasonable? I barely slept that night. I spent hours pacing around my apartment, trying to decide what I was going to do. Eventually, a plan started forming. One thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me ever again. I'd already let them take enough from me. I deserved far better than this. The next morning, I called one of my closest friends who's an attorney. Even though I knew it was impossible for the baby to be mine, I wanted to understand exactly where I stood legally just in case they tried something. He explained that, without a court-ordered paternity test, I wasn't legally obligated to do anything. Even if a test somehow came back positive, they couldn't simply dump the child on my doorstep and demand I take responsibility. They'd have to go through the proper legal process if they wanted child support or to establish paternity. Hearing that lifted a huge weight off my shoulders. At least legally, I knew they couldn't force me into cleaning up the mess they'd created. Legally, I felt a little better. Emotionally, though, I knew my parents. They weren't the type to hear no and walk away. They'd keep calling. They'd keep showing up. They'd keep pushing until I finally gave in. That had been their favorite way of getting what they wanted my entire life. So I came up with a pretty simple plan. If they couldn't find me, they couldn't pressure me. I packed an overnight bag and went to stay with one of my closest friends. After I explained everything that had happened, he just stared at me for a second before saying, "Man, your family is completely insane." Honestly, that was probably the understatement of the year. I sent my boss a message saying I needed to work remotely for a few days because of a family emergency. Technically, I wasn't lying. While I was crashing on my friend's couch, I started making phone calls. First, I called my landlord to see if there was any chance I could end my lease early. Then I contacted a real estate agent to ask how quickly I could find another apartment, preferably on the opposite side of the city. After that, I reached out to HR at work to see if there were any openings at another office where I could transfer. For once, it felt like life was actually working in my favor. Our Seattle office happened to have an opening that matched my position. My landlord already had someone interested in taking over my lease, and one of my old college friends who lived in Seattle offered me a spare room until I could find a place of my own. Everything came together much faster than I ever expected. I didn't tell anyone in my family what I was planning. I stayed completely off their radar while I quietly got everything in order. The next day, my friend's security cameras caught my parents showing up outside my apartment. They were carrying a baby seat. The second I saw them on the camera, I texted my dad. "Leave right now or I'm calling the police." "I'm serious." They ignored the message and kept pounding on my door for almost half an hour before finally giving up. A few minutes later, my dad texted me back. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life. That's your son." I didn't waste my time arguing. I blocked that number too. That night, I made one of the biggest decisions I'd ever made. I accepted the transfer to Seattle. It came with a better position, better pay, and, best of all, it put nearly 2,000 miles between me and the family that had destroyed my life. I emailed my boss and told him I wanted the transfer to happen as quickly as possible. Thankfully, he was incredibly understanding. He pushed everything through faster than I expected. 3 weeks later, I was boxing up everything I owned. The day before I left town, I sent one final email to my parents. "I'm not your hero. I'm not the backup plan you can dump your problems on. That child isn't mine. Every time you look at that little boy, I hope you remember the son you chose to throw away. And every time someone asks where I went, I hope you remember that your own decisions drove me away. I'm not coming back. Ever." After sending it, I shut off my phone. I loaded the last of my belongings into my car. Then I started driving. For the first time in years, it honestly felt like I could breathe again. Moving to Seattle turned out to be exactly what I needed. A new city, a new job, new coworkers, new friends. Nobody there knew anything about the nightmare I'd left behind. I rented a small apartment downtown. I buried myself in work. Little by little, I started building an entirely new life. For the first few months, I was constantly looking over my shoulder. Part of me expected my parents to somehow track me down. I changed my phone number again, deleted every social media account I had. I even rented a P.O. box so nobody would know my actual address. Maybe that sounds paranoid. But after everything I'd been through, I don't think anyone could blame me. As more time passed without hearing from them, I slowly let my guard down. I started exploring Seattle. I met new people. Eventually, I adopted a goofy mixed-breed dog from a local animal shelter. He was this awkward rescue mutt who needed someone to care about him. Honestly, I think we rescued each other. About 6 months after I moved, I received an email from one of my cousins. She was one of the few relatives I'd always trusted. She told me my parents had finally ordered an official DNA test. The results came back. The baby wasn't Mason's. He wasn't mine either. Apparently, Chloe had been seeing several different men during that time. According to my cousin, Mason completely fell apart after learning the truth. He moved back into my parents' house. The three of them ended up raising the little boy together after Chloe officially gave up her parental rights. Part of me genuinely felt sorry for that innocent kid. None of what happened was his fault. But another part of me felt an incredible sense of relief. At least I finally knew the truth. That email was the last connection I had with anyone from my old life. I thanked my cousin for letting me know what had happened. Then I politely asked her not to give anyone my email address. As far as I know, she respected that request. Life kept moving forward. Seattle slowly stopped feeling like a place I'd escaped to, started feeling like home. My dog became my best friend. I eventually started dating again. Nothing serious at first, but it felt good knowing I could still meet people without constantly expecting them to betray me. Every now and then, something would remind me of everything that happened. I'd feel that old anger all over again. But those moments became less frequent as time passed. Eventually, it stopped feeling like an open wound. It became nothing more than an unbelievable chapter from my past. Funny how life works sometimes. 2 years earlier, I honestly believed my life had ended. Now, I can say without hesitation that I'm happier than I've ever been. Sometimes the people you choose to surround yourself with become a better family than the one you were born into. And sometimes all it takes to start over is a loyal dog and a fresh beginning. So that's my story. If you're going through something similar right now, hang in there. Things don't get better overnight. Healing takes time, takes work. But life really can get better. And if there's one lesson I learned from all of this, it's this: always trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Listen to your gut. It usually knows the truth long before your heart is ready to accept it.